So, I mean, last night we had an arson attack on a serving prisoner officer's home, a really dangerous escalation, and shows, I suppose, the reality of what prison officers in this country are facing in working with some of these really dangerous criminals, organised crime gangs in the system. What do we know about what happened?
Well, as far as we understand at the minute, there was a member of a prison staff at home in County Meath, and it was actually at 5 a.m. this morning. So it's still literally only a couple of hours ago when this happened. But the front window, as we understand, was broken, and then something thrown in, possibly a petrol bomb or some other flammable material was used. The officer himself was able to put out the flames, and we understand no one was injured, but there was certainly he and his wife were both at home at the time. And obviously, an arson attack like this going into a house, it's really dangerous. I mean, like, the potential for fatalities is very high. The Prison Officers Association were quick off the mark this morning, putting out a statement in which they described it as a sinister attack, and extremely sinister, I think was the exact phrase they used. And it was just, I think it's a while since we've kind of seen something like this. I know anecdotally of years ago, different things happened. There was I think attempts to spray graffiti on one prison officer's house years ago, down the country, in a different part of the country. And when he went to confront somebody, he suffered a blow to the head. But that was kind of seen at the time, I think, as kind of local criminals getting some kind of revenge. They obviously knew this guy's profession, which is always a kind of an occupational hazard. If they can probably feel that prison officers, who are essentially civilians in a disciplined service, they're not Gardaí, so they're not necessarily going to have service weapons or anything like that at home. So they're probably seen as an easier target in that sense. And it's a frightening. It's obviously intimidation at its rawest form.
Yeah, I mean, it's two things. Like, it's obviously an attempt to intimidate and threaten, but it's also an act of violence in itself. As you said, if you throw a petrol bomb into somebody's house, literally anything can happen. I mean, that can cause death. We've seen it many times. So it's two things. Now, we know this officer, part of his work involves dealing with organised crime gangs as they're operating within the prison system. So he's kind of at the forefront of dealing with probably some of the most dangerous people. What we also know, and we can't get into some of the specifics of this, but we do know that there have been escalating threats towards officers from, in particular, a couple of people, basically Kinahan cartel hitmen that are now in the prison service, that have been causing huge problems, and that those threats have been taken very seriously. We can't get into them for legal reasons, but there have been guards have been brought in to investigate them. And then we also know, in regards to this attack, that they're looking at criminals associated with the Dundon McCarthy gang as well, who have also been at the forefront over the years of making threats against officers and also violence within the prisons themselves. Yeah,
that's the information we have at the minute, that people connected with the Dundon gang are the chief suspects behind this, possibly. I mean, that can change. And I mean, obviously, the Dundons have proven themselves to be extremely manipulative and clever operators within the prison system. Like, we have 3 brothers currently serving life for murder in the Irish system, and Ger then is serving 15 years for his part in an extortion attempt in the UK. But they've been involved in intimidation before. There was, I think even last year, Wayne Dundon, it was reported that he tried to stab or attack an inmate with a bladed weapon, and 4 staff were injured, when they came to stop that. And he was transferred from, I think, Mountjoy back to the high security in Portlaoise at that stage. But going back even further than that, like in 2008, I remember we did a story about, at the time, there was a prison officer who, was somewhat involved in terms of, doing his job. And unfortunately, that involved coming into contact with members of the McCarthy-Dundon gang at the time. And when he pulled up at traffic lights on his way home, a good half-hour drive from Wheatfield Prison, where he'd been working at the time, a 4x4 pulled up beside him, and the passenger and the back window all came down, and 2 guns were pointed at him, and a very clear message to stop his work, and which is why you have then, which is the reason why you have specialist units now who carry out this work in prisons, so that if they suspect that a particular inmate is involved in, organising drug supply or organising intimidation and has a weapon or a phone or something, they'll go in and search. Yeah. So they're not the day-to-day officers who have to go in every morning and, trying to encourage someone to just, to do what they do, to get through the day without going crazy or get to the exercise yard. And so the people who are kind of dealing with them face to face on a daily basis aren't the ones now who are expected to go in and carry out the searches. Because obviously prisoners who are innocent and, I would get upset, at people like coming in and searching their stuff or whatever. So, you have the specialist units now who do that. And a lot of it is based on intelligence. There's a confidential phone line within the prison system. They'll obviously, I'm sure they liaise with the Gardaí. And they'll have, their own officers on the landings, again, will have their own suspicions and pass these on to the operational support group who then will carry out an operation to try and break it up. Yeah, so they have these for a start, they have people working full-time on intelligence, don't they, in the prison service now, who are assessing threats, looking at contraband coming in, because a lot of this is driven by the contraband trade in the prisons. People like the Dundons, in order to, have power within the prison system, they have to have access to drugs and phones, really. That's what greases that whole wheel. Obviously, then we have people in cartel figures in all of the prisons, Mountjoy and Portlaoise in particular, and they control this drugs trade so they can make money. They have a very comfortable time. And in order to sort of control that drug trade, they can be putting pressure on officers, really, can't they? They put pressure on everyone. The Dunnons have been linked as well, to prison vans delivering stuff for the kitchen, and civilian drivers there's been attempts to get at them to make sure there's an extra delivery in the back of the van. And again, this, it's a constant, I suppose. It's a constant area of work that the prison system have to keep at the whole time. And it does come down to simple economics, that the price of drugs inside in a prison is 3 to 4 times its value on the street. So, there's huge profits to be made. When you have the likes of Mountjoy, whatever it is, 700 plus, Wheatfield, probably 800, the Midlands, something similar, although there mightn't be a huge drugs market in there with so many of the elderly sex offenders, but certainly at least half of the prison there would be kind of in the market, and it gets expensive, and it's very much all about control, and it's all about manipulating people as well as stiff arming them as well. The likes of John Dundon or Wayne are never going to get caught with a bag of pills in their cell. Some other unfortunate is going to be kind of given that job, and they won't have a choice because they'll have run up a debt or they'll have crossed them in some way, and the intimidation and fear that's used keeps these people in line. But as you say, they are also always on the lookout for an officer or a member of staff or somebody that they can turn, whether it's somebody who is, vulnerable for whatever reason. They may have a gambling issue, they might have a drug issue themselves. It could be a simple thing that a member of their family is related to someone who has knowledge of them and is able to put pressure on them through intimidation. And we've seen some of these cases over the years where people with, who had unblemished service records have suddenly found, attempting to smuggle in, whether it's phones or drugs or whatever, to allow these people to operate. And it's, it's any organised criminal. We had it with some of the D22 gang in Mountjoy years back, who were very successful. I think Thomas Hinchin at that stage was kind of one of the big dogs on the block, and was involved in a case where I think a member of staff, ended up in prison himself. And there's been others, that's happened to over the years, and others then who may never have faced criminal charges that have been moved or forced to retire or simply, resigned before, it got more serious. And in some cases, I'm sure, pretty innocent members of staff have been caught up and have gone to the authorities and done it properly, because there is protocols in place to protect them. But it's all about the the tangled web we weave, in terms of, there's people in there who are gangland criminals and are sitting there all day thinking about how they're going to get in their next little batch of drugs, and whether it's by drone or by somebody body packing them or whatever way they're going to do it.
Yeah, and of course the drones have become a huge issue now for a couple of reasons. Like obviously the drugs are always thrown in over the nets, but the drones give them a great control. And there's also, although there have been people arrested and before the courts, the drones are just a much easier and more sophisticated way to get them in. But there's also been the traditional way as well of, there's a lot of vulnerable people in prison. And the Dundons in particular have a habit of preying on maybe people that are drug addicts, I suppose, that are in for very short periods of time, or maybe are getting out at times, going to court, maybe getting out for appointments in hospital, or even in and out in terms of serving very short sentences. And they can be put under huge pressure to get drugs back in, can't they?
Yeah, and like we've seen, I'm sure you remember the infamous picture of one of the Dundons with his arm around an unfortunate prisoner with his head partly shaved, and they'd drawn all over him with a marker, including obscene message on his forehead. Yeah. Like, and all plenty of smiles and thumbs up, but it certainly wasn't a joke. You know, I mean, that all of that kind of thing is aimed very much at intimidation. And I mean, like there's been cases of where if a prisoner lets slip that they got a compensation claim, like they can effectively become a hostage in the prison to some of these gangland people who are forcing members of the family to draw down that money and put it into their accounts. They'll often use like the payment for drugs and stuff like that. I'll often go through gambling accounts or online online apps or whatever that people can access from their prison cell now. And that's the way that works. I mean, prisoners who are vulnerable, are targeted without a doubt. And it's a huge task to keep those prisoners away from like kind of the manipulative gangland people. And I mean, like one of our colleagues, wrote about John Dundon recently. He spent some of his time quite usefully studying psychology, and was on the road to being, moved to the Grove in Castlereagh, where he enjoyed greater freedom. But they just felt that something wasn't right, and that he was kind of manipulating people into handing over their tuck shop treats and stuff like that. And it was just a pure intimidation and menace that the man brings. But he's also, like, he's not stupid. He can read people, obviously, and they can get people to do what they want.
They know what buttons to push. And of course, the people that are there to stop that happening are the prison staff. And if they do intervene, these guys don't like it being put up to them. And we can get, and we don't know in this case, but something like what happened last night. I'll just read out a statement from the Minister for Justice, Helen McEntee, who described the attack as a reckless and unacceptable act of violence that could have had very tragic consequences. Nobody's home should ever be targeted in this or in any other way, she said in her statement. And last year, then she talks about increasing the maximum sentence for assaulting a peace officer, which includes prison officers or members of An Garda Síochána. But it just shows you the reality of what having to deal with these guys every day. And these people, they cannot bear to be told no, really, can they? Like some of these guys.
I mean, we know from over the years, like some of them are complete megalomaniacs, like, and they're bordering on probably personality disorders in that regard. I mean, why else would you be like such a nasty, drug dealer? I mean, the Dundons particularly were a phenomenon, like in the way they arrived and just, lit the touch paper that became the feud in Limerick over whatever it was, like best part of 2 decades and 19 people dead. And it was over a relatively small kind of territory for drug dealing. And I mean, while they had connections in the UK and are a transnational gang, they certainly weren't at the Kinahan cartel level. Like they weren't dealing with people, at government level or whatever. But at the same time, they were still like, had the ability to try and import, RPG, hand grenades to try and kill someone in another prison cell that they thought was going to testify against them. Like, I mean, like they're extremely dangerous, extremely wild, reckless crew. And if it turns out then that they are, if it turns out they remain the chief suspects, it just shows you like, that they haven't stopped trying hard to be criminals. And we know that. I mean, we're continuing to be, like highlighting stories in the Sunday World about what they've been up to behind bars.
Yeah, no, a very worrying development. But again, we'll try and come back to it when, if there's further developments. Thanks very much, Eamon.
Always a pleasure, Niall.
I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs, and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.